morning, everybody. Happy Saturday. Welcome back to House Talk Pregame. I'm Dr. Lauren Pitts Bounds, licensed couple marriage and family therapist and sports family therapist. Ronnie cannot be with us today. I was actually so looking forward to his harassment. You know, Ronnie loves to harass me, but he is experiencing a family emergency. So I just ask that you all would keep him and his family lifted up in your prayers. He'll be back in a couple of weeks, enjoying new fatherhood and all of that. But he's got some stuff going on today that took him away from us for today's show. So again, please keep him in your prayers. We have a great show for you today. Look, we're talking about the dark side of sports, and sports has recently shown a dark side. I disagree with that statement. I think it's been there all along. Let me just go ahead and say that. I think that it's getting more visibility today because of social media and just the fact that we're living in a technological era. But we have three great guests with us today. We have former scholar athlete David Lawson. We have women's softball coach and writer and sports podcaster Courtney Mendenhall. And then OMG on all the levels, we have two-time MLB World Series champion Scott Spiezio. And I was telling Scott before the show, I was like, yeah, my mom's a Philadelphia Phillies fan. So, so when I told her that Scott was going to be on the show, she was like, yeah, good for him. I was like, Mom, really? That's what we're doing? So it's like, so welcome everybody. As I said before the show, I'm going to create that space for you to come in your own way and share your own story and connect the dots. And then we're going to walk through and have this powerful discussion for our viewing and listening audience that I think is truly a topic that doesn't get discussed enough. You know, I feel like we're a reactive society and we tend to hear about the dark side of sports when somebody drops the ball, literally or figuratively, and ends up on that dark path of life in their athletic journey. So I definitely think that this is an important topic that we need to shed some light on so that folks have a clear understanding of what's going on from each of your perspectives and to really get some insight as to how to be proactive in hopefully not finding themselves on the dark side of sports. I think that it's really important for them to hear from each of your experiences and your journey and connection to what that looks like and how to avoid it. Just a couple of things. I want to do a couple of shout outs first if I can. So you know, we just are on the back end of the NFL Combine. And, you know, one of the things that we do here on House Talk, we like to really make sure that we're spotlighting our historically Black colleges and universities too, because a lot of times they just don't get the media attention that they deserve. So I did want to acknowledge the key players that really left their footprint, if you will, on the 2024 NFL HBCU Combine. Just want to show some love to Jonathan Higgins. He's a safety from Jackson State. He had a 4.45 40-yard dash and a 38.5-inch vertical. Then we have Jarvion Howard, running back from Alcorn State. He did a 4.52 40-yard dash. Ian Wheeler, running back from Howard University. Ian is he ran a 4.57 40-yard dash. Then we had Travion Green, linebacker from Prairie View A&M, right here in Texas. Travion ran a 4.43 40-yard dash and a 34.5-inch vertical jump. Then we had Eric Smith, cornerback from Florida A&M University. Woohoo! Love those Rattlers. He did a 4.34 40-yard dash and had a 36-inch vertical jump. Then we had Davius Richard, quarterback, North Carolina Central. He was a 4.6 40-yard dash. Jaheim Hazel, cornerback, Jackson State. Look at Jackson State putting them out. He ran a 4.47 40-yard dash. We had Zarion Hayes. He's an edge from Alabama A&M, 4.65 40-yard dash. We had Darian Brokenbar, edge from Howard University, 4.84 40-yard dash. These men are running like gazelles. running and
Yeah.
jumping. Like, what in the world? So wishing them continued success and hoping that these stellar performances that they demonstrated at the combine work in their favor and they get to fulfill their dream of going to the NFL. And as we talk about so often on HT, we know for a lot of these athletes, not just athletes from HBCUs, but athletes, period, for them, the NFL is not just about their love for the sport. It's not just about the NBA and their love for the sport. It's not just about the NHL and their love for the sport, or the MLB and their love for the sport, or any of these other um, amazing uh, sports that these men and women participate in. But for many of them, it's about having an opportunity to better provide for their families. It's about an opportunity to provide a better quality of life for those that they love and care about, and those that are the nearest and dearest to their heart. For many of them, as we know from particularly with football, from the Walter Payton Man of the Year Award, it's about truly impacting their communities on a very, very deep and sustainable level. So hats off to all of these athletes. Again, we hope everything works out for them. So let's jump into this discussion, shall we? So first and foremost, gentlemen, you okay with the lady going first since she's the lone female guest today? All
Sounds
right,
good.
Courtney. You're a familiar face to HT, but please reintroduce yourself and share with us, if you would, why you agreed to be on this particular episode of HT. I know that this topic is something that's special to you, and I'll leave it at that.
All right. Well, thank you for having me, Dr. Pitts. I'm very glad to be back here once again with you to share my insight with the other guests and the audience out there looking. My name is Courtney Mendenhall. I'm a softball coach and a writer and podcast host living in Danville, Virginia. I'm currently working on my doctorate in sports administration with St. Thomas University, and I'm set to finish next May. So I'm starting my dissertation in August. I'm very excited about that because it's at the tail end of the program and I can finally breathe and just say, okay, I got this in the bag. But I chose to be on this episode because as a professional working in this field, I know that there are a lot of things that happen behind closed doors that aren't really discussed as much, or some people wonder like what it's like to be working in sports. And as a former player, I know the player side of it, but now that I'm actually working as a professional in the field, I get to see, firsthand like what's going on with the players, with the fans, with the other coaches and other things like that. So that's why I chose to be on this specific episode for today. And I thank you once again for having me.
Always welcome, Courtney. Always. Thank you. David?
Yeah, so my name is David Lawson. I'm based in Canada. I'm a men's coach. I do coaching for men struggling with burnout, stress, and anxiety. Having gone that through my own journey, I have a lot of experience. Sometimes you hear in sports, the best coaches are the ones that actually played the sport and excelled at it. So unfortunately, I went through some burnout in my life in my 20s and 30s. And now I went on a healing journey to study various healing modalities to help men who are struggling. And a lot of times it ends up being athletes who are struggling with burnout, stress, and anxiety. You can see it. Michael Phelps, a former Olympic athlete, he struggled a lot with anxiety and depression when he retired from the Olympics, and he was a very successful gold medal athlete. I think he won 4 or 5 gold medals in a row, one Olympic. And you see people like Barry Saunders, one of the best running backs in the NFL. He just sort of disappeared at the peak of his career. I think he mentioned he just didn't feel fulfilled. So a lot of the work I do is helping men look inside and deal with some of the traumas, because a lot of this stuff is trauma based. I mean, every one of us probably has some trauma in their life, and that's usually where it starts, is teaching men to look inside versus outside. And a lot of sport, as you know, it's about wealth and fame, and if you don't know how to work with your own emotions, then you're not going to be able to be what this topic is about, empathetic and sympathetic, and really connect with other people in a loving manner.
Wow. Thank you, David. Scott?
Thank you, Dr. Pitts, for having me on. I'm learning stuff already. This is great. My name is Scott Spiezio, from Morris, Illinois. My father, Ed Spiezio, played for 9 years in the big leagues and taught me how to play. And I ended up playing 12 years in the major leagues. We both won 2 World Series. And yeah, I ended up having some struggles after a major injury towards the end of my career with drugs and alcohol, and definitely saw the dark side of sports. And it took me about 12 years to recover. I've since been almost 6 years. In April 6th, I'll be 6 years sober. And I've just, yeah, it's amazing. And I've just been sharing my story. I've been speaking to schools, churches, charity organizations, as many people, doing podcasts, trying to share my story and the dangers of drugs and alcohol. I've also recently went and spoke to the Major League Players Association, current and recently retired players, along with the Major League Alumni Association, on the transitioning out of baseball, which is very tough. A lot of us find our identity as a baseball player, and then when it's done, we're kind of lost. And so we've kind of opened that dialogue up with the Alumni Association and Players Association. It's been a pretty neat thing.
Wow.
So now I actually here I also do lessons, teach kids, and while I'm teaching them, I talk about my struggles, because it's not a matter of if they're going to be presented with things in front of them. It's a matter of when, and a lot of them have already had that happen to them.
Yeah. Thank you so much for those great personal introductions. And I want to go ahead and jump straight into this conversation, because each of you actually hit some buzzwords that tie into some of the things that I want you to speak to more in depth. So when we're talking about the dark side of sports, there are some key issues that arise, and you sort of touched on, right? So we look at gender equality, we look at sex and sexuality, we look at institutional racism and cheating, we look at doping to enhance performance or to cope with pain or whatever the case may be. We look at technological advances and how sport reflects local culture. It's what we know to be true based on what each of you just said, is that sports is so much more than winning and losing. So when you think about that, as your journey, in speaking, in coaching, in navigating your athletic journey, talk to us about the negative traits that you think that athletes may come in the door with that can make them more susceptible to landing on the dark side. And let me just tell you a little bit what I mean by that. So for example, David, you said that, some of us may have some form of trauma, right? Well, my husband and I were having a conversation last night about how money enhances who a person really is, right? So when you think about that, where athletic performance is concerned, talk to us, if you would, about personality traits based on what you've seen or maybe what you've personally experienced in and of yourself that could land an athlete on that dark side of sports. David, can we start with you?
Yeah, I'll share a little bit of my own journey, and I think I see it a lot in mainstream professional sports. So I had some trauma as a kid. My dad passed away when I was very young, driving me onto a hockey game when I was 15 of a massive heart attack. So at that time, playing hockey, and in most sports, there's a real masculine side to sport where you're taught to, suck it up and don't cry and be a man, which serves you very well when you're out in the field. If you get a baseball in the head, you kind of shake it off, or you get a hockey stick and you lose a tooth, you shake it off, you get it back out there. But when it comes to going off the field and you have something happen to you, say a divorce or a death of a parent or a death of a friend, and you don't deal with that emotional side of it. For example, myself, I pushed my dad's grief, the death of my dad's grief, the emotion of grief down with pushing through sport and striving to be a great athlete. And I got into alcohol. And so I think our sports culture has a lot of that masculine side to it, which again is being very, very tough. And again, it serves you well in the field or on the baseball or in the hockey arena, whatever, wherever it may be. But off the field, I think men have to learn how to get in touch with their emotions. And that's a huge problem right now in society. I mean, most of the violence in our culture is done by men, and men, the only emotion a lot of men know how to feel is anger. So these emotions that are uncomfortable from trauma, they'll push it down in most cases with addiction. And that could be addiction to many things. It can be addicted to the sport itself. And then when the sport's done, like Scott mentioned, you're kind of left struggling. What am I going to use to push this emotional energy down? A lot of athletes, I think it's like 60% of NBA athletes, when they retire, they end up losing their financial wealth. Like they end up almost like flat broke. So I think what happens with a lot of men, they'll use sport to push that emotion side down. And then when they're done in the sport, it leads to all sorts of problems. And even during the sport, if you're not dealing with your emotions, how can you be loving? And a lot of these athletes, they end up, getting into violence with their girlfriends and their spouses, and all sorts of nasty things happen. And that's the forefront of this discussion, in my view, is our society just is not trained to deal with trauma.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you. You took the words right out of my mouth from a clinical perspective. When I'm working with my clients and I'm screening them so that I can appropriately assess whatever their mental health issue is that clearly impacts their relationships, 99.9% of the time there's unresolved childhood or adult trauma. And I want to just say, and Courtney, I'll come to you next because I want you to piggyback on this a little bit, is that it's not, and I know you know this, but I'm just putting it out there. It's not just men that don't want to deal with their emotions. Oh my gosh, I've got half the women on my caseload act like they treat emotions like domestic terrorists, and the same thing. Everybody knows anger. Everybody can tell you that they blacked out, that they were angry, that they were enraged, but nobody wants to put their finger on the pulse of the raw, authentic emotions that are hiding behind the camouflage or the smoke screen and mirrors of that anger word that everybody wants to zero in on. So you hit that spot on. Courtney?
Well, thank you for that great insight, because I wanted to touch a little bit on what David said about him being a male and them telling him to suck up his emotions. As a female, my dad trained me before I actually started playing in leagues and things like that. And my dad is a tough guy, but he's also very generous. So when he was teaching me and we would play tennis or softball or anything like that, and I seemed like I wanted to pout, as he would say, he would tell me, nope, there's no room for that. Don't do it. So I dealt with the dynamics between my parents growing up, and I didn't quite understand it. And I was holding on to that. So when I played sports, it was like I went out there and I just felt like I was leaving all my emotions out there on the field. And I remember a couple of times where when my dad was training me, and he would be kind of tough sometimes, and it would be like, as a kid, I'm not understanding why he's being so tough, and it would hurt my feelings. So with dealing with my mom having health issues, I sort of went through that phase where I had to grow up really early, and I had to take on a role where I had to be responsible. So I use sports as an outlet for myself to express myself, to have fun, to have a place to go to where I can be with other people that are like me. And I'm very thankful to say I never like had any like substance abuse issues or anything like that. But I've been around people that have been doing those type of things, and I see what it can do to people. I'm very proud of the two other guests, David, and I forgot the other guy's name, that are willing to share their story, because I believe that it not only happens with men, but it happens with women as well. And up until just a couple of years ago, I actually started to understand that I needed to express my emotions, because I'm an analytical person. I think more than I feel. And I feel that sometimes like showing my emotions it could be a sign of weakness, but it's really not. There's so many things that we hold in sometimes. And I believe that there needs to be people out there that would be willing to share their story, to share what they're going through, in order for other people to see that it's okay for you to express those emotions, because you can't hold on to that stuff. But over the last, I'll say 3 or 4 years, I've grown tremendously emotionally, and I've understood that I can't take anything personally, but I have to think about it as a way that it helped me grow. So I thank my dad. I'm not blaming my dad for anything. I'm not blaming my mom. I won't even blame God for it. I'm thankful that I had that structure, because I needed that. And he told me it's okay to be mad and upset at your performance, but you can't stay there. You have to keep going.
Mhm. Mhm. Thank you, Courtney, for sharing that. And as you were speaking and connecting the dots with David, what came to mind is our prison system in this country and probably even around the world is full of men and women that never learned how to properly express their emotions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's tragic on so many different levels that people are taught from a very, very young age that expressing your emotions is a sign of weakness. It reminds me of one of my baby cousins. He'll be 13 next month, but he was probably maybe 6 or 7 years old when we were at their house one day. And I don't even know what my husband said to him. And and he said, "You don't have any feelings." What? He told him. It was like, no, whatever it was he did, my husband said, "You're hurting my feelings." And at like 6, 7 years old, he was like, "You don't have any feelings," and walked away.
Oh my God.
But that's, not taking anything away from his parents because my cousins are great parents. However, he's an athlete. He running track. He started running track with the community leagues at a very young age. So he's got that tough as nails mentality already. Like I said, he'll be 13 in April, but he's already got that mentality that sports and feelings, except for anger, are not connected. And it's like, no, we do have feelings. No, we don't, got Nani. No, we don't. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
Scott.
It's funny you say that because I always used to have a saying where I'd say, "You hurt my feeling." Just one. Sing
Just
it.
one feeling. Just one feeling.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, what you guys said is definitely true for me. Growing up, I remember taking ground balls and my dad would be hitting them really hard and they'd come up and hit me in the throat or something. And he's like, "Come on now, at least you're not in Vietnam. It's not a bullet. Let's go. Let's suck it up." He was tough on me. He was preparing me because he knew what it took to get there and stay there. I remember going to St. Louis for his World Series reunions, and guys like Lou Brock and Bob Gibson, they'd say, "If you want to make it, it's easy to make it, but it's hard to stay there." And so my mentality, basically, all my energy was put into making it. And I remember, like, not wanting to cry when my grandfathers died. I cried, but I like went in the corner and cried. I didn't want anybody to see me. And that's the way I was through my whole career. I remember the Oakland A's trying to send me down and make me miss arbitration, and I was flustered. And they were taking at bats from me. And finally, my wife's like, "You should go and talk to somebody about this." And I'm like, "No, I'm not. What do you mean, like a counselor or something?" And she's like, "Yeah, there's an EAP program you can go." And I went reluctantly, but it really did end up helping me. He basically told me, he goes, "You can only control what you can control," and which was huge for me. And so I went in and talked to my manager Art Howe and my GM Billy Bean, and I said, "I know what you guys are doing. You're trying to send me down." And I said, "You can do that. You can take away my playing time. You can take away, you can send me down, but you can't take my work ethic and you can't take my talent. So somebody's going to want me, and when they do, I'm going to shove it up your blank." And so I had that mentality, my whole life. And I really didn't like to show emotions. I always kind of put my game face on when I get to the clubhouse. And even with the Cardinals, I would dye this thing red, and I called it my war paint. As soon as when I left the house, I dye it red, I turn into this warrior, and that's kind of the attitude I had. And I really, like you said, I tried to hide my emotions. When I got hurt, was the first time I was like, wait a second, because they were telling me I might not play again, probably not going to play, might not walk again. And then I was like, wait a second, I've been good my whole life, and now you're telling me I can't even have fun? Because I was anti-drug, anti-drinking, even though it was all around me. I had guys, in Oakland taking steroids. You had McGuire and Canseco and Giambi and guys like that. And, alcohol is in the clubhouse, everywhere you go. Guys are always like, let's hang out afterwards and have some beers and shots. And, I always was one of those guys that tried to stay away from it, and then when that injury happened, I really didn't know how to deal with it. And that's when, like everybody's been saying, I turned, well, David was talking about it, I turned to alcohol. And then through alcohol, I ended up liking it and getting addicted to it. And then eventually, after a year and a half, trying cocaine for the first time. And then it was kind of off to the races, just a balancing act. And that was my downfall.
It's, when I think of if I sort of blend everything that you all said together, it's a recipe for disaster. It really, really is. And when you talk about that balancing act, right, it's like the emotional piece, the athletic pressure, and then the if you sustain injury and what have you, but you look at the foundation, right? People act as if our athletes sort of came out the womb playing sports, right? And there's this blatant disregard. I would suffice it to say people don't even care of the root of who this person is, right? A lot of what I do with my clients is based on sense of self. In other words, if you don't know who you are authentically at your core, then it makes you susceptible to enemy encroachment. In other words, all of these other things can come into play and can manipulate you and suck you in and entice you to do and be and have and give and do all of this stuff that in the grand scheme of things is totally contrary to who you really are at your core. But you have all of these pressures. Well, where does that sense of self get fractured at in the beginning? In childhood, most of the time, right? Because we talk a lot about attachment. I'm very, very big on attachment-based therapy, and I'm very, very big on helping clients to understand the things that transpired in their earlier years, in their formative years, that fractured their ability to make healthy attachment, that fractured their sense of self, or in some people's cases, shattered their sense of self. So, David, when you talk about stuffing your feelings down as it relates to the passing of your dad, there are so many people that I have worked with over the years, including my current athletes and my former athletes, that's all they've been taught is to stuff, 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 stuff. And then it comes out in all of these explosive ways. It's like, I honestly and truthfully believe when I think about some of the hits that I've seen on the football field, when I think about the fights that have broken out on the baseball diamond, when I think about the aggression that gets demonstrated at the basketball games, and like folks are flipping the heck out. Well, why? Because all this stuff is down here at the bottom of the volcano. It's like the volcano's active. People think the volcano's dormant. It's not. It's active. It's just waiting for the right stimulus to bring it up and out in all of these explosive ways. And sometimes those explosive ways is the drug and alcohol that complicates things. It is, the bad call of the ref. It is losing a playoff. It's all of these things. But the root of it is this shattered or fractured sense of self and all of this unresolved stuff that was never taught when you were younger. And to your point, Scott, so many people do not want to go to therapy. They don't want to go to therapy. I hear they don't want folks all up in their business. I don't need to talk about all that. It's coming out. That's the piece that people don't get. It's coming out in all sorts of non-productive ways, but they don't recognize that the root of their problem, the blood, guts, and gore of their life, is why this stuff is showing up in drugs and alcohol, in these repeated cycles of broken relationships. I tell my clients all the time, you're the common denominator. You're the common denominator in every relationship that you find yourself in, whether it's in the athletic environment or outside of the athletic environment. You're the common denominator. Everybody else is not the problem. You have personal deficiencies that if you don't address those personal deficiencies, guess what? This cycle is going to continue, and it's going to show up in all types of ugly ways in every area of your life. And that leads me to the next question that I have for you, a sort of a statement, but I want to give some technical terminology first. So I'm really, really, really big on research. And as we're conducting all of this research around the dark side of sports and athlete sense of self and these sorts of things, there's this term that I want to introduce you to. You may be familiar with it, but we call it the dark triad. And when we're talking about the dark triad in sports, we're talking about Machiavellianism, narcissism, and psychopathy, among other personality traits in athletes. So let me break those down real quick. So when we're talking about Machiavellian behavior, Machiavellianism is a personality trait that denotes cunningness, the ability to be manipulative, and a drive to use whatever means necessary to gain power and control. Machiavellianism is one of the traits that forms the dark triad, along with narcissism and psychopathy. Narcissistic personality disorder, that's pretty much a no-brainer, right? It's a mental health condition in where people have an unreasonably high sense of their own importance. And what I tell folks is, that's rooted in insecurity, right? Like people say, he's great, just ask him. She's great, just ask her. But the root of that, because we gotta keep going back to the root. The root of it is really insecurity. You're conveying to the world that you're all that to soda rebate bag chips, but behind the scenes, you're insecure, you're anxious, you've got all of this other stuff at play that you're masking with this grandiose sense of self, with all of this, look at my shine. See how bright I am? The psychopathy is neuropsychiatric. It's where you have deficient emotional responses, lack of empathy, poor behavioral controls, commonly resulting in persistent antisocial deviance and criminal behavior. Based on your journey, either as an athlete and coaching and speaking and what have you, how prevalent do you see these things going on in the environments that you've been in previously or are currently in now?
I believe that, or am I going?
Yeah, you can go ahead, Corey. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm glad that you defined those terms for me because that's very interesting. I'm very big on research as well. Sometimes as a person that works in mental health, I'm quickly able to identify when I see those traits in some of the things that my clients deal with. If they're dealing with a difficult boyfriend or a controlling parent or something like that, I'm able to identify those. So as far as something you've been mentioning since we started this show is sense of self. I believe that it starts with that because there are some people out there that are athletes or former athletes that had their identity tied into them playing their sport, and I'm one of those people. I never once tried to make myself look like I was all that in a bag of chips, like you said, and then behind closed doors, I'm just so insecure. But everybody has insecurities, but at the same time, everybody handles them differently. So the people that are labeled as narcissists, they make excuses as to why they do that. People that are not narcissists, they admit that, okay, I have these insecurities. I need to work on this. This is a part of my trauma, my experiences. And, I've seen it in a lot of different people in my years of working, and it's frustrating to deal with. However, you have to be that person that stands up and say, this is going to stop here. You have to understand that everybody has different circumstances and everybody's not going to handle everything the same way as you. As a coach and as a person that works in mental health, I will say that it's a blessing to be a person that can show people the right way. And those qualities, those three qualities that you mentioned, I have no tolerance for any of those when it comes to dealing with my programs or coaching student athletes, because I know that, you know, one day you're not going to be an athlete anymore. So you have to fill in that gap. And I had to learn how to do that myself, not to go on too much longer and to let the other guys speak. But when I stopped playing sports, I really had to figure out, okay, what else am I good at?
Mm-hmm.
I know that I'm good at writing. I'm good at public speaking. I'm not just an athlete. I don't look at myself as just being an athlete. I have to look at other good things about myself as well. And then once you do that, you start to build that self-confidence and that self-esteem. And then you're not labeled as a narcissist, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. David, you want to go?
Yeah, I mean, I'll sort of tie it into professional sports. I'll give you a good example. Conor McGregor, the UFC fighter. Not that I'm a fan of that sport at all, but there was a guy that was elevated to massive wealth, you know, millions of dollars and huge amount of fame because that's such a big sport. And I think what we do in our culture, we sort of put these athletes up on pedestals and we make them our heroes.
Uh-oh.
I think he froze on us.
Scott, you want to jump in and
you want me to? Sure, yeah.
Go
So circle back to David after me. Yeah, so this is all very interesting. You know, it's kind of the first time I've heard some of this stuff. So it's very cool. You know, with me, like Courtney, you know, I had my identity was baseball. You know, I was a baseball player. That's it. Like I remember from a young age, like in grade school, we'd had an aptitude test, and you know, it was like third grade, and it's supposed to come back and tell you what you're interested in. And mine came back like fireman or something, and I'm mad. I'm like, what is this stupid test, you know? And I told my teacher, and she's like, you got to have realistic, you know, goals. And I'm like, this is realistic, you know? And so that was it. Like I didn't have a plan B. It was it, you know. I always when I was down in St. Louis with those guys, you know, these Hall of Fame guys, you know, Stan Musial, you know, there's tons of them down there. They'd always say you got to outwork the people, you know. It's not the people in your hometown. You got to outwork the people in Venezuela and Cuba and Dominican and Puerto Rico. So every bit of my day was basically thinking about that. You know, I was practicing my signatures in study hall when I was, you know, 10 years old, getting ready for that day. Cause you know, I saw my dad signing and stuff, and my dad was really into, sports psychology. So the mental game of baseball. So I would visualize myself, you know, every night for my next game and in my, you know, in the future in the playoffs and stuff like that. So I was always prepared for that. We had a cassette tape that I play every night, and you want to talk about narcissistic, but like it would play these subliminal tapes, you know, these subliminal music in these sayings, and then it would also say these things like the driving purpose of a winner flows through your body. You are great. You are a champion. There's no limit to your strength, power, and quickness. You have more than enough to win every game. And I'd hear these over and over every night. And so I was basically, you know, built to be this machine that there was no room for emotions, you know? And so, you know, I remember the first time I was in the big leagues, you know, and everybody pumps you up. They tell you how great you are. And then I turned on the radio, you know, I was doing well, and I turned on the radio and I'd hear all this great stuff. And then one day I turned on the radio and they were just all these fans were all over me. And then I turned it right off, you know? Yeah. And so I would only like watch the stuff. I'd only watch Sports Center when I hit a home run or something, you know? And so you get pumped up, you know? And then after the World Series, I had a great run. It had broken the record for most RBIs, and I'm on the Leno show and the David Letterman doing the top 10 list and all this stuff. And you get raised up to this this level, you know.
Mhm.
And then when I got hurt, it kind of came crashing down, and I didn't know how to handle it, you know.
Mhm.
And it started this like I said, like you guys were talking, I covered those emotions up with alcohol and later drugs.
Yeah.
And then it kind of hit me when I was done with baseball. I didn't have that identity anymore. um you know, I started feeling this guilt and shame. You know, I went
Mm.
through a divorce. I went through another divorce. You talk about the common denominator, right? That was me. Um, and I got to the point where I felt I was worthless. I'd blown my chance to make a difference in life, and I used the alcohol and the drugs to you know, I went further, you know, leaned more into that instead of facing the problem.
Mhm.
And finally, you know, I started getting into where I was, you know, going to get help, you know, and little by little, I let down my shell
Yeah.
and let people help me. For a while, I mean, the first time I went to rehab, I had an alias. I wouldn't even tell people what my real
Wow.
name was. Yeah, and I would not participate in all. You know, like in AA, it says first step.
Mhm.
You're powerless over alcohol, and your life has become unmanageable. Like
Mhm.
for me to say I was powerless over anything, it was very hard for me to say. That's why it took so long. You know, I'm like, I'm different. Like I can do this. People told me I couldn't make it and play
Mhm.
this long, and I proved them wrong. So I'll prove them wrong. You know, even with my liver,
Mhm.
like they'd
Mhm.
say, you better watch out. Your liver enzymes are elevated. And I'm like,
Mhm.
my liver's tough, you know.
Mhm.
And I'd say stupid stuff like my liver is evil. It needs to be punished. You know, I got too much blood in my alcohol
Wow.
system. And then guess what? My liver didn't like that too much. I got jaundice. They told me I had a 20% chance to live. I'm going to need a liver transplant. And, you know, that's when the wake up call hit. And
Mhm.
luckily, a miracle, God was looking out for me. My liver returned to normal, and I've been sober ever since. But yeah,
Amen.
it's been a crazy ride.
Yeah. My
That's a
mom always
blessing.
says God looks after fools, babies, and drunks.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Thank you.
Thank thank God. Yeah.
Right?
Sorry, Dr. Lauren, I lost you there. Sorry about that.
You're
Yeah.
fine, David. We said we'll circle back to you when it kicked back in. Go ahead. You were in the middle of a thought.
Yeah, no, I apologize for the computer misconnection, but yeah, I was just saying, I think a lot of times athletes, we get built up as better. Like we're all, if you want to turn this into a little bit of a spiritual talk, we're all just souls on a journey. Like we're all equal, and I think sometimes athletes, our egos get blown up out of proportion, that
Mhm.
we're better than everybody else, and
Mhm.
that disconnection from reality leads to some behaviors that are not healthy.
Yeah. Well, the Bible says pride comes before a fall.
That's
That's
right.
right.
Yeah.
Amen.
That's right. And so, you know, as I think about what you were each saying, I'm almost inclined to say that it sounds like a teeny bit of narcissism in sport is to be expected, but to piggyback on what you said, Courtney, is that it's like that. So I'll reframe it. So it's not, we're not going to call it a teeny bit of narcissism. We'll call it your competitive edge. And that
Yes.
we'll call that competitive edge. And with that competitive edge, humility says, you know what? I'm great at what I do, but I'm not necessarily great, right? We're all flawed. We all have the ability to fall short and to miss the mark, whatever that mark is. You know, one of the things that I just had this conversation with somebody yesterday too, is that perfectionism in my personal and my professional opinion is a recipe for disaster because it's not something that you can ever achieve per se. I believe that one's pursuit of greatness and excellence is a healthier way to approach your expertise in your mastery of your sport. And when I think about some of the interviews that I've seen with some of athletics greats, you know, Michael Jordan, Tom Brady, you know, they talk about the humility that's associated with their errors, the humility that's associated with their mistakes, and how they use those mistakes as leverage to get better. right? They recognize that part of their athletic ability is going to, in essence, reveal some of their flaws. But they continue to work to combat those flaws, knowing that they'll never, ever combat all of them. And
No, for sure.
that doesn't make them any less great. They are the goats, right?
Yeah.
But they're the goat, they're flawed goats.
I think we're all like onions. We're constantly peeling layers off and going deeper and deeper. And something Scott mentioned, like a lot of men, especially men and women too, I suppose. I'm saying men because I work with men in men's coaching, but a lot of time we're ashamed to go seek help if we have a failure or something happens in our life. And it's really our responsibility to go seek a mentor or a counselor or a coach to help us get through that. It's our worse is the other way of going down a road of a lot of times it's addiction and sort of we just self-abrupt our lives, through poor habits.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Talking about that, when I was playing and I knew I had a problem that I needed help with, I was afraid to approach the organization and tell them because I thought, well, if I do this, then I'm going to be out of baseball. And so like my fear was I can't really let on to how bad this is. And I can't really dive into this, when I did finally go to them, and they sent me to rehab, it was 30 minutes away from the stadium. And so like, I was afraid to say anything there because if I said anything, I knew it would get to the papers, and when I did go somehow in Tony La Russa and Walt Jocketty were mad. Somebody leaked it when I went to them. Somebody leaked the story to the paper. So the day after I had basically told them about my issue, it got out front page. It was all over Sports Center. It was on the front page of USA Today. It was on the front page of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. And so then I was like, oh, great. Here we go. I'm going to lose everything. And so I withheld really what, if I had known what I know now, I would have said, you know what, like, I need your help. You got to send me away. Because it was August. I should have just went the rest of the season, taken it off and got help for, 6 months in an undisclosed place or something like that. Because then it would have helped me deal with these unresolved issues and things like that. And, and also, when I ended up getting divorced, like there was a fracture with my family. And so I was dealing with that too. I did, I'm so used to talking to my dad every day. And then all of a sudden 2 years, I'm not talking to him and things like that. So, I think a lot of athletes are afraid to reach out because of fear of losing their career.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It reminds me, it was probably a season or so ago, I was sharing how I had a lacrosse athlete on my caseload at that time who was actively involved in sport. And this individual was really, 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 really struggling. And one of the things that I said is, I really think that you need to make your coach aware. And the athlete said, Dr. Pitts, I can't do that. I cannot do that. The coach had said enough in the locker room and in meetings and films and what have you to let the athlete know that there's no room for mental illness on this team. And if it's there, you're benched. And I'm like, my head was on fire. Like I because the flip side of that is, what was it, 2022, when we saw a record number of athletes commit suicide. And these were current scholar athletes that we saw a record number of athletes, not just here in the United States, globally, that committed suicide. And I'm like, is this the lack of empathy that coaches have, that there is just a blatant lack of humanity, that we don't respect, honor, and have a heart, that we're so focused on winning that this young person's life is essence being traded for a win? I was livid because I'm like, what would that look like if it were the coach's child? Would the attitude be different?
Mm-hmm.
You would hope that it would be. So why would you not have that same sense of humanity for someone else's child? Like it is just absolutely positively disgraceful. We're down to 10 minutes. There's a couple of clinical things that I wanted to point out, and then I'm gonna um, bring you to our final question, and that's what we'll close out with. But we keep circling back, right, to the role that trauma and emotions and unresolved stuff plays. And I just wanted to take a moment to share that when I'm working with any of my clients, but in this context, I'm going to particularly highlight my athletes. When an athlete comes in and they say, Dr. Pitts, I'm having performance issues, or Dr. Pitts, I'm having relationship issues that's impacting my performance, or I'm having family issues, like you said, Scott, whatever the case may be. So this is what I have to screen for, right? Is there reports of childhood physical, sexual, or emotional abuse? Is there a description of parents as physically or emotionally neglectful as they were chemically dependent, too busy, absent, etc.? Is there a description of childhood as chaotic as parents were substance abusers or dealing with mental illness or antisocial behavior, etc., leading to frequent moves, multiple abusive spousal partners, frequent substitute caretakers, financial pressures, i.e. poverty, and or many step siblings? Is there reports of emotionally repressive parents who were rigid? See that a lot with the athletes, right? Rigid, perfectionistic, threatening, demeaning, hypercritical, and or overly religious. Is the athlete demonstrating irrational fears, suppressed rage, low self-esteem, identity conflicts, depression, or anxiety and other insecurities due to painful early life experiences that haven't been addressed? I have to look for these things because there's a constant theme. There's a constant theme. And this is what I want to say to every athlete out there listening, every parent or whomever, before I ask this last question of you all. Therapy works when you work it. What we're asking clinically is that you trust the process. Give the behavioral mental health and relational practitioner the opportunity to provide a safe space for you to be vulnerable and transparent so that you feel comfortable in your discomfort of being completely open and honest, because we need that in order to be able to help you. What I tell every single solitary potential client during the consultation is this: this is a no judgment, no criticism zone. I'm going to meet you in a place of common humanity with an open heart and an open mind each and every single session. I'm not going to judge you. I'm not going to criticize you. I will hold you accountable for your healing trajectory for as much as you allow me to do that, but I'm not going to judge you or criticize you. Healing requires acknowledgement, honesty, genuineness, accountability, humility, in many cases, forgiveness, wisdom, maturity, common humanity, patience, compassion, warmth, sensitivity, empathy, and respect. That's not just respect for people, it's respect for the fact that we're all flawed. It's respect for the fact that we're all imperfect beings. Self-pity, blame, bitterness, and resentment will sabotage your healing journey. My final question for each of you is this. Why do you think that athletes, and more particularly elite athletes, struggle with mental health issues?
I can start off with that. I think there was a common denominator. You mentioned Dr. Pitts at the beginning of this conversation, and the common denominator is having to look inside. And I think for athleticism and professional athletes, especially, there's so much pressure, and there's so much fame and wealth. And Scott mentioned this, to go, and because it all starts with seeking a mentor or a coach or a helper, because we, like you said, we're all flawed, we're all not perfect. Every one of those things you read off on your list, probably someone has a little bit of that in their life, whether it's a divorce of a parent, or an abusive parent, or an alcoholic parent, or a parent that worked too much, or whatever it may be. There's going to be some trauma. It might be a minor trauma or a major trauma, but everybody has something. And it starts with finding someone to help you look at that. And it's painful, and that takes some courage on the person. In your case, your clients that are athletes, it takes courage. Is first off, find someone to help you. Second off, to look at that pain, because all this is really learning how to feel. Once you learn how to feel and look inside, you can move that, because all it is an energy. And the energy, once it comes through us and moves, then we can create space to operate at a high level as an athlete, and in our personal relationships, and be loving and empathetic towards everybody in our lives. But it starts with and I think Scott mentioned there's a fear of maybe losing your job as a pro athlete, because you're saying, hey, I got something wrong. You don't want it. You want to sign that next big contract. You don't want to look flawed. But I think men and women and pro athletes need to realize that and I think some of the teams are starting to bring in staff that are psychotherapists, and it's starting to grow, because they're realizing that every single one of these athletes has something. And it starts with bringing someone in to help them. And there's different modalities, as you know. Talk therapy is great. I do a lot of meditation and breath work. I also do qigong, which is moving energy out through the body. But there's so many different ways to heal. But the first step is taking ownership that we're all flawed, and seeking someone like yourself, or like me, or like Scott, or like the young lady. Sorry, I forgot her name. Everyone has something they can offer. Everyone has something that they can offer to athletes, and that's where our society needs to start to take a look inside, and stop being so judgmental, and realizing that we're all flawed, we all need help, and we all should work together to come to that realization.
Yeah, I love that. Scott?
Wow, I mean, David said it perfect right there. It's very hard for athletes especially for me to like be vulnerable. It took me a long time. I mean, a long time. You keep the insanity part. You keep doing the same thing over and over and expect a different result. I did the same thing over and over, and finally I had to give in and really be vulnerable. And since then I've had countless therapy sessions, and then my faith as a Christian, I really dove into that, and that's really helped me, being in life groups and other things like that, where we kind of, like you were talking about, hold each other accountable, talk about things that might be bothering us, and in healthy ways to work through them, together. And before, like, I didn't really tell anybody I love them. Now I tell everybody I love them. I cry all the time. I've become a different person. My empathy, before, like, talking about drugs and alcohol, I was so anti it. I used to just think people were weak, and now, going through things, I'm so much more empathetic to people. You don't know what they're going through, what issues they've had at home. And so I just tried, finally, that whole thing about being vulnerable. I think that's the biggest thing, because if you show any weakness at the elite level, people will take advantage of it. I no matter what, I was not showing any weakness, and finally to be able to do that is how I healed.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you, Scott. Courtney?
I agree with David and Scott on their perspectives, and I must say that I believe it comes from the sense of self, like you were mentioning, Dr. Pitts. Like you said, if you show any weakness or anything like that at the elite level, it'll backfire, and you might be lost on a job, or you might be not as able to receive other opportunities from other clubs and teams and things like that. I think another thing that athletes deal with is a sense of wanting to belong somewhere. So when they identify with the sport that they play, they want to belong there. So that's what they tie their identity into. But I do have to agree that David and Scott gave out great points that I believe that, if we work together and we show that compassion and try to recommend therapy for others, because I also receive therapy as well. I've been doing it since about 2017. And I've noticed that it's been helping me. I've become, I won't say a different person like Scott mentioned, but I've evolved since then. And I noticed that, if I'm sitting at a wedding or if I'm at a funeral, I actually shed tears now. And I'm like, oh my God, I can cry. Like,
Yeah.
I do have tears.
It's so refreshing, and it makes me think like, man, I'm really like working on this journey and I've come a long way. So I just want to continue to be an advocate for those people and those athletes that struggle with those things.
Thank you. So what I would like for you each to do is share with our viewing and listening audience how to get in touch with you. You're each doing some extraordinary work. David, I'm assuming you don't have a problem coming to the US.
Not a problem.
Tell our viewing and listening audience how they can contact you if they wanted to bring you in to speak or to train or, to just work with you. And then leave us with a final tip that you think that each of our athletes, regardless of what level they're at, need to know, please. And David, we'll start with you.
Yeah, sure. So I'm based in Toronto. I do work online with men. I do elite men's coaching. A lot of men that are struggling with burnout, stress, and anxiety, which is a common thing we talked about today. My website is awake, like just the word awake, and then warrior.com. You can reach out to me there through email, or my email is david@awakewarrior.com. And yeah, one final thing to add to this show. Thank you, Scott and Courtney and Dr. Pitts, for having me. It's been a really enjoyable conversation. It's brought a lot of stuff to light that I think is very valuable for athletes and for society in general. I want to just say that it's not a weakness to look out and seek a mentor or a coach or a psychotherapist. It's actually a good thing. And I think our athletic community at the professional level should start to maybe embrace that a little bit more, because they'll end up dealing with athletes that get more addicted to alcohol and drugs if they don't address it at the root cause. And if they address it early, they would have a lot less problems.
Right. Thank you, David. Courtney?
You're welcome.
You can find me on Facebook as Courtney J. Mendenhall, and I'm also on Instagram and X or Twitter or whatever they want to call it now as Courtney Janae. And also you can reach me on my email at Courtney Mendenhall, 0, 3 @gmail.com. And the last thing that I would like to say for anyone watching or athletes out there is to stay true to yourself, love yourself, and make sure that you strive towards living a better life for yourself and those that come behind you.
Thank you, Courtney. Scott?
First of all, thank you for having me on, Dr. Pitts, and thank you, Courtney and David. I've learned a lot today. It was a very incredible conversation. I'm glad to be a part of it. As far as finding me, I have SpiezioBaseball.com, Facebook, Spiezio Baseball. I have my email address is SpiezioBaseball21@gmail.com. And then I think I'm on Twitter. I don't really check it that often. And I know I'm on Instagram, but I don't even know what my handles are. I'm an old school guy. Like the Facebook, I'm on Facebook too, both as my business and personal. Probably the easiest way is the Spiezio Baseball 21 at gmail.com. I speak at different events quite a bit now. And I basically share my story, and I can go into different aspects of what they want me to speak about. And then I also do coaching, so you can look me up and send me a message, and I'll send you more information. As far as the takeaway, I would just say, don't be afraid to get help. It's not don't be too manly or womanly. you know, feel like don't feel intimidated by it. You're going to end up helping yourself as a person. There's things after sports, it's not the end of the world. Really, really be intentional about the day. The thing I miss most, I love to compete. The thing I miss most is the relationships I had with my teammates. And so really kind of cultivate those relationships. I have a handful of guys that, I count as my best friends from my playing days. And we keep in touch and that means more to me than the rings, and the stats and all that stuff. And so just, really nurture those relationships.
Awesome. Wow. Time goes by so fast. What a powerful, powerful conversation this has been today. A lot of really great information for our viewing and listening audience to take heed to. So sorry that Ronnie didn't have an opportunity to meet you two gentlemen. I know he's bummed about that. We send continued prayers to him and his family. Hey, folks, don't forget to tune in every Thursday evening at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for Dr. Pitt's Tips Live. I am live on Instagram and Facebook. You can find me on Facebook as Dr. Lauren Pitts Bounds, House Talk Pregame's page, or on Legacy Counseling and Life Coaching's page. TikTok, I don't fool with Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, but the lives on Thursday, Dr. Pitt's Tips Live every Thursday, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Instagram and Facebook. Check it out, covering a wealth of relationship information. Welcome any questions that you want to submit ahead of the live, unless you tell me that you want me to disclose your name. I won't disclose your name when I address any questions that you have in real time during the live. Thank you all so much for a powerful, powerful show. I wish you all continued blessings. Have an amazing rest of your day and weekend, and I hope to see you again. Take care, everybody. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys. Take care.
Nice to meet you all.
Same